Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Work From Home Show. Shout out to all our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. I'm Naresh, this with Adam Schrader. Today we have Robert Beatty on the show. He is the author of the #1 New York Times best-selling Serafina and Willa series published by Disney Hyperion. He writes full-time now, but in his past lives, Robert was one of the early pioneers of cloud computing as the founder and CEO of Plex Systems, also the co-founder of Beatty Robotics, and the chairman and chief technology officer of Narrative Magazine. In 2007, he was named one of the entrepreneurs of the year. So what a storied background. This is a little different from the other authors we've interviewed who started out in journalism and then pivoted towards writing fiction, or just writing in general. In Robert's case, he had a successful and lucrative business career and then went into the fantasy fiction space. So Robert, welcome to the Work From Home Show.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with what I mentioned in the introduction. Walk us through your journey from entrepreneur, before you were even an entrepreneur. So let's say high school, college to entrepreneur. And then how did you go from that to New York Times best-selling fiction author, not business book, nonfiction author, but
right.
Fiction author?
Yeah, so it really started when I was 11 years old, and I really encountered two things that I fell in love with. The first was that I was a big reader. I enjoyed reading fantasy novels like Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and that sort of thing. And one day I ran out of books to read, and my mom said, "Hey, there's a typewriter in the closet over there. Why don't you go play with that?" So I pulled it out and stuck a white piece of paper in it, and the first words I typed was chapter 1. And I just started writing a story, and I fell in love with it. I just thought it was so cool to be able to write my own story. So that was one thing I fell in love with, and I continued doing that for the rest of my life. So I just kept writing novels and trying to improve my skills as a writer, and I did that pretty much every day for the rest of my life. And then at the same time, that same year, my dad, who worked at a power company, took me into a big room and showed me this big giant box and said, "That's a computer, and that's the future of the world." And I looked at that and thought, wow, that's really cool. And I started playing around with that, and I started getting my math teacher and science teachers to let me connect to the university mainframe. And I started programming computers when I was 11 or 12 years old as well. And so I pursued that and really enjoyed that. I eventually learned many computer languages and went to college to study mechanical engineering. And I worked in the corporate world and ended up splitting off and starting my own internet software company. And so I was the CEO of my company for many years and really enjoying myself doing that. I loved it. But at the same time, at night, I'd get home at 10 or 11 at night, and I would work on my novels, and I just enjoyed writing my books. So,
and was this fresh out of college?
Yeah.
That you did this? Right out of college you started this company?
No, actually, I got a degree in engineering. I worked in a manufacturing company for 10 years and developed a computer system within that company, and that sort of took over that company, and then the owner of that company and myself split off and started our own new company that was software for managing manufacturing companies, and it was cloud-based. And so I pioneered cloud-based computing before it was even called that. Eventually, it became called cloud computing.
And was this
yeah.
also, you said 10 years after you graduated, so by that point, were you married? Did you have any kids? Or were you a single guy?
When I started the company, you mean?
Yeah, you said you were coming home at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., and then writing,
Yeah,
after
so
that. So
that was when I was married, actually.
Ooh,
So
kinder wife than mine.
So it was a full life, definitely, for sure. And so then I got the company to the point where I had done, in terms of the technology of the company, I had done what I wanted to do and sort of proved my original vision for the company and decided that I would sell the company. And then I started focusing full time on my writing and on my family, my daughters. And so that's how I shifted over to writing full time. And that's what I do now.
So which do you consider the scarier ventures, starting a company with employees or going off and leaving the business world and just going to be an author full time?
Right. Actually, the scariest thing I ever did was when I'd been working for this company for about 10 years. I was, an executive of the company. I couldn't get any higher in the company unless I took the CEO's job. And so it was a very secure financial position.
yeah.
And so the scariest thing I ever did was to say, okay, I'm going to quit my awesome job and I'm going to start my own company from nothing. Mm-hmm. And that was very scary, but I'm so glad I did it because it was really empowering and just great fun to run my own company and to build it up from nothing and to have all these people working for me and have all these programmers working for me, and we built a great system.
Well, I can relate to some of this because I'm a business guy. I run 2 businesses, nothing like what you ran. But I make a good living. It's been able to afford my lifestyle and my family's lifestyle. And I'm also a writer. So I write a little bit of fiction, but mostly nonfiction. I've published 5 best-selling books on Amazon, focused on what my businesses are about, which is technology, online and digital marketing, e-commerce. That's what most of the focus is on. But I'll tell you, and I'm your age, so I'm 32, and I believe you were about 32 when you left that full-time job to start your first company. And it's somewhat addicting. It's like I've worked on ventures before. I've liquidated, sold some small ventures here and there in the past. And I'm always thinking, all right, what's next? I got to do the next business thing, the next business venture. How did you, after selling your businesses, making a lot of money, how did you just walk away and say, you know what, I want to pursue writing full time? Or maybe you became a passive business person or a passive investor. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. So you're a classic serial entrepreneur. So well done for that. And so in my case, I had developed this company. The name of it is Plex and Plex Systems. And it had become very successful. And when I exited, I said, okay, I am working at what I think is the best company for me to work at. And I love the people I work with and I love the technology. So I need to be in a situation where I don't need to work anymore. And so when I eventually sold the company, my exit allowed me to do that. So at that point, I could do anything I wanted and live anywhere I wanted. So I was in a situation where they did want me to stay on as the sort of technology advisor and as chairman of the board. So I continued to stay on for a few years to help them through the transition. That also helped me through the transition because it was kind of hard to go from full on controlling everything to nothing, right? So it was nice to have that segue from the corporate technology world into being on my own as a writer, because they are very different. In my previous job, I was managing 100 software programmers, and so it was quite an intense job working with people every day. But on the inside, I'm sort of a loner and an introvert, and I like working on my own. I actually like the software programming and the technology side more than I did starting to run a very large corporation. So I loved it when it was small and it was about the technology. But once that was established and it became more about the organization and all the people and the rules and the policies and the accounting and the lawyers, that's when it became less interesting for me. And that's where I felt like, okay, it's a good time for me to shift over into something else. So then when I started writing, it was rather scary at first because for several years I wasn't getting any traction. And I thought, okay, I went from being very successful at that thing to being a total failure at this new thing. Good job, but eventually I stayed bold, which is one of the themes of my books, and just kept at it. And through sheer force of will, eventually wrote a book that drew the attention of an agent and then was published by Disney.
Can you talk a little bit about, you built a company and, started that vision and created that environment. And then can you talk about building an entire world? Because we haven't talked to a ton of people who, do the fantasy writing. And is there any relationship at all? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But in general, between starting companies and having a vision for a company and having a vision for an entire new surrounding new world. It's not based on, your books aren't based on, like the United States or something like that. You're creating a whole new world. Can you talk a little bit about creating that world in your writing?
Sure. First thing I wanted to mention that you sort of touched on, which is, when you're programming a computer, you're sitting in front of a computer screen, you're using a keyboard, you're coming up with an outline of what needs to be done. You're working on all the details, making sure everything's perfect. That's actually kind of similar to writing a novel. I know it doesn't seem like it. It seems like they're in totally different worlds, but mechanically and in terms of your brain and your time, it's a similar thing where it's very much in your mind and you're working out the overall outline of how it should function, but you also have to pay attention to every single little detail. And so writing a big software program is somewhat similar to writing a novel. And I might be the only person in the world who thinks like that, but to me, they are somewhat similar. A lot of people are shocked to hear that an engineer can even write a sentence, let alone a book. But I find that software programmers and engineers are actually very creative people, and they just express it in a different way. And in my case, I like to express it through the stories I was trying to tell. But in terms of your other question, which is about world building, my books are actually set in the United States. They're set in the Great Smoky Mountains and in the Blue Ridge Mountains, and they take place in historical times. So I like to say they're a mixture of history, mystery, and magic. So what I've done is, books like Lord of the Rings and things like that, they're based in Europe, but I wanted to write a American story, have American fantasies. And so my stories take place in 1900 and 1901, set in the American South, in the mountains of the South. And so that's my framework for my world, and then I build the fantasy elements on top of that.
Now, are you from the Blue Ridge? It says you live in Asheville or the Asheville area. Are you from that area, and that's why you include that area as your setting?
Yeah, so I've lived here for about 15 years now, and I just absolutely love it here, and it's very inspiring here in terms of the beauty and the forests and the rivers and the waterfalls and everything about it is just so inspiring to me. And that's why I include that setting in my stories, including Willa of Dark Hollow, which is what we're talking about today. But I was originally born in Michigan, and that's where I started my company, and that's where I ran my life for many years.
Where in Michigan?
What was that? In southeastern Michigan, just north of Detroit.
I looked on your website, whenever we booked you here, and I noticed that at the bottom of your homepage, you talk about how you're converting Willa of the Wood and Willa of the Dark Hollow into a TV series. How did you go about getting that TV series, and kind of how has that been a different can you talk about that venture that you're going into there?
Sure. Yes, it's very exciting.
That sounds like basically a new business.
Yeah, a whole new career. Yeah, it's a joke sort of between my family and I that, okay, so you're a software guy. No, you're an engineer. Okay, no, you're a writer. No, now you're a producer. What are you exactly? So the way that started is that I wrote the Willa books, Willa of Dark Hollow and Willa of the Wood. And Willa of Dark Hollow is the new book, and readers can just come into the series right at that point. They don't have to read any of my previous books. It's a good place to start. But the previous Willa book, Willa of the Wood, was a #1 New York Times bestseller and attracted a lot of attention and a lot of readers. It's being taught in over 1,000 classrooms nationwide. It's been translated into 22 languages. So it's having quite an impact. And the theatrical rights were purchased by a studio and called Entertainment One, a big major multinational conglomerate who's made most of the television shows and movies that we're all familiar with. And they were out looking for someone to act as the producer for the show. At the same time, the famous actress Amy Adams and her daughter were reading Willa of the Wood as their bedtime story each night. And so they would read Willa of the Wood, and they fell in love with it. And her daughter, who was about 10 at the time, said, "Mom, this is the kind of story you should make a movie about." And so Amy Adams went to the studio who owned the rights, and they got together and brought it to me. And so we've created a team now. And so Amy Adams is one of the executive producers, and I'm one of the executive producers. And we're working on developing the script and developing the concept art and the casting and all the various details that go into making a live action multi-season television series.
That is awesome. And you've come out with so many #1 New York Times bestselling fiction, fantasy books. Are there any other books that are going to be adapted to TV shows or movies? And as I mentioned earlier, Disney owns the rights to your book. So you have that connection going as well.
Right. Disney is the publisher of the books. That's correct. And so the first book was Serafina and the Black Cloak, and I wrote 4 Serafina novels. And you're right, those were all New York Times bestsellers. And then I wrote Willa of the Wood and then Willa of Dark Hollow. They all take place in the same universe, if you will. The Willa books obviously focus on the Willa character, who is quite a different kind of person. And then Serafina is the focus of the first 4 books. So Serafina, we've been doing some work on the movie or TV side, and we had a team together, but then COVID kind of wrecked that and tumbled it all. And so we're kind of back to figuring out how we're going to put a team together and find a good showrunner for it and a writing team and so on to get that into a television series.
Now, one of the things that's, honestly, I mean, it's kind of strange that it stands out, but your main character is a girl, which is, for the fantasy adventure world, isn't the most common. Is this spawned by having daughters, or was it something that just whenever it came into your head it was a girl, or kind of how, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so how that happened was that when I was younger, when I was 11, and I told you about that, I started writing fantasy books with young male characters like myself. And I wrote those for a while, and then I became an adult, and I thought, well, maybe I should shift over to writing for adults, and I did that for many years. And then I got married and had a family, and my 11 or 10-year-old daughter walked into my office and said, "Hey, Dad, can I read what you're writing?" And I said, "No, it's not for kids, it's for adults, and it's not going to be appropriate for you." And she went away disappointed. She came back a few months later and said, "Dad, can I read what you're writing now?" And it really kind of pulled my heartstrings. And so I said, well, I'll just try it for one day. By this point, I had been writing for many, many years, right? But I thought, what if I took the skills that I had developed over the years and applied it to writing for a young person like I started writing when I was 11 years old. And so I decided to write about a young girl because I was going to write the story for my daughter, Camille, and her two younger sisters. And so I started writing the story specifically for them. And as soon as I started doing that, I just knew immediately this is what I was meant to do. This is going to be my breakthrough novel, because my brain was just like totally wired to tell a story to my own daughters, because I knew my audience and I knew what they would like, and I had through practice had developed the skills to tell a story to them. And then I also, because I was somewhat terrified that they wouldn't like the story that I created for them, I said, hey, why don't you guys help me write this? Let's come up with the story together. And so we started brainstorming the ideas and working out all the details of the characters and the plot. And then I would write the chapters, read them to my daughters, and they would tell me in real time with brutal honesty what they thought, what they liked and what they didn't like, and what parts were boring and should be cut and which parts were awesome. And so we worked on this together for about a year. And when we were finished, I took it to New York City, went to a big pitch conference, pitched it to a bunch of agents. And for the first time in my life, after writing for 30 years and having nothing but rejection, for the first time in my life, all the agents I pitched to wanted the book. And so I picked the best of those agents, and then he took it off to Disney, and they wanted to publish the book. So it's kind of cool that I started writing when I was 11. I went through this long journey, but it was when I started writing for my 11-year-old daughter that I really found my vision and my voice and had my first breakthrough novel. And then every novel I've written after that, which has been about one per year since then, has become a New York Times bestseller.
You might want to not let them know that, or they're going to start asking for royalties.
Yeah, it's called college. Yeah.
Very true. Yeah. All right. So that's a really great story. I'm impressed. So have they pitched you any book ideas?
Well, they have each pursued their own interests, and that's great. So one of the other things that we've been doing in addition to working on the books is my daughter Camille, when she was young, started taking things apart around the house, and like electronic things and toasters and stuff like that, and leaving them in pieces. And I said, we might be able to like build something rather than just take things apart. And so she jumped on that and said, I want to build robots. And so we started building robots, my daughter and I, and we actually started a business to build Mars rover replicas, functional robots, for use in science museums. And so my daughter grew up doing that, and now she went to Columbia University to study engineering, and she's doing an internship at Tesla. So she went one way. Then my other daughter, who was also involved in that, but more on the design side, she went into art school. So she's in college and art school. And that leaves my 9-year-old, who is now my chief collaborator with writing. So she was the one who helped me come up with a lot of the ideas and improve Willa of Dark Hollow, which is my current book.
What a great
So hopefully
story.
I won't run out of kids, because I don't know if I'll have any books after that.
Just a really, really good, awesome story. Robert Beatty, #1 New York Times bestselling author of the Serafina and Willa series. He is a serial entrepreneur. Awesome journey. The website is robertbeattybooks.com, robertbeattybooks.com. Beatty is spelled Beatty, Beatty, robertbeattybooks.com. Robert, any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners, or anything else you want to promote?
Well, the main thing I just wanted to say is that Willa of Dark Hollow, as I mentioned, you can get it now. It's available now. It's just you don't need to read any of my previous books. It's for anybody from age 8 to 108. So if you're in that age range, you should be good to go. A lot of young people are reading it, but older people as well. And one of the themes of the story, especially for young girls, is to stay bold. And that is to, figure out what you want to do, figure out what's right for you, and go after it. And stay courageous and stay bold.
Robert Beatty, thanks so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. That's www.workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list, like us on social media. We're everywhere. Email us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. And until next week, keep on working from home.